Hello, my name is Matthew Povey and welcome to Wodonga Counselling and Hypnotherapy. Today's video is just a bit of a brief discussion and introduction to stress and the virtues and values of stress, what positive and negative stress looks like, as well as some management strategies about stress. Stress is one of those things we often hear about in our day-to-day lives in the news, the media, and even though it's something we often hear a lot about, people don't quite understand what stress is, and there's not often a differentiation between positive stress and negative stress. So positive stress is something that is useful to us as humans and is inbuilt in us to get tasks done. So we might have positive stress at work, which allows us to focus on getting a project done or getting homework done and doing activities, as well as positive stress around motivation to do things like exercise and that. Then there's negative stress, and this is where you hear a lot of the stuff in the news and the media about the impacts of stress and what negative stress does to us. Negative stress is when positive stress, what describe to people is like a kettle where it's on boil, and when the kettle's working fine, steam can escape and the lid stays on. But then when things start to malfunction or it gets too full or starts to boil for too long, that lid can begin to shake and rattle under the pressure of the steam. And if left for too long, as you probably may know with old kettles on a stove, it can actually eventually make the lid come off the kettle. And this is when positive stress can go unchecked. And negative stress has a lot of impacts on the bodies, and it begins to cause us to start catastrophizing. So one of the major impacts of negative stress is overthinking about the past and the future, about things that may happen and may not happen, and often this leads to anxiety. Another impact of negative stress can also begin to make us compare ourselves to others and self-criticize, which can then lead to things like depression. And there's a pretty big fine line, and everyone's unique in their response to stress. So this line is very individual. So it's important to be able to recognize the signs of negative stress and when positive stress is turning to negative stress and going unchecked. And this is when, as I said, overthinking and catastrophizing, when you're getting depression, when you find that it's difficult to get on or do life's activities, even the emotional side such as irritability, lack of sleep, and comparing ourselves to others. So there's some of the signs of negative stress. Now, negative stress has a big knock-on effect on the body and brain. What happens with negative stress is the amygdala, which is a part of the brain, both in the right and left hemisphere, because there's two sides to the brain, that moderates stress. Now, when we've got positive, healthy stress, the frontal part of the brain, what we call the prefrontal lobes, this is the rational thinking side of the brain that allows us to evaluate things, get things done, make decisions, and it also does things like maths and comprehends language, and the right side even does things like is artistic. And with the positive values of the stress, this is working well, but then when the negative stress begins to impact us, the feel-good hormones like dopamine and serotonin get replaced by the amygdala and another part of the brain that surrounds the amygdala called the hippocampus, which means seahorse and looks like a seahorse and surrounds the amygdala. Now these release other hormones that counteract the positive hormones like serotonin and dopamine, and we enter this stage you may have heard before in the media or out and about called the flight, freeze, or fight response. Now, when the hippocampus and amygdala release these hormones and the fight, freeze, and flight response is initiated in the body through the release of adrenaline and cortisol, this puts the body both in a mental and physical state of ready to react against stress. So this is when negative stress begins to become unchecked, because then when this hormone is released, the prefrontal rational thinking part of the brain begins to what we call decompensate, and so it doesn't think as rationally as it used to, because blood's diverted away to feed the parts of the brain that respond to negative stress and danger and to protectors. And so it's important to have a bit of an understanding about the physiological as well as the mental aspects of stress. And this is something I go into much more detail with my clients. And I often explain it through different metaphors, such as running a computer or a well-oiled engine that can go unchecked or out of control. But when these things go unchecked, so there's a lot of negative effects with this negative stress. One of these is if you're in chronic pain, it causes it to tense up due to the release of the adrenaline and cortisol. So if you suffer from chronic pain, generally people with chronic pain begin to experience higher levels of pain and discomfort. People with anxiety over time begin to get more anxious, as this part of the brain that gets left unchecked and is actually just looking out to protect and survive. And the prefrontal rational thinking side of the brain continues to lower and decompensate due to less blood going to it and less rational thinking. Because if you've ever suffered anxiety and depression, and those times when you are clear-headed, we often notice there's moments of rational thinking, but that begins to disappear when negative stress takes over. And so the other physiological effects, aside from the psychological effects, are the muscle tension in the shoulders and all throughout the body, which people begin to notice after a time. Fatigue is another big one, because being in this heightened response when adrenaline and cortisol is being released uses a lot of energy. So often we begin to notice we're tired and fatigued. And a major one that we begin to notice, two major ones is I'm very big on, is loss of interest in activities, as I mentioned with depression in other videos, which can happen with anxiety and depression. And the final one, aside from losing interest in activities, is also, it's what I call brain fog, and it's when this rational side of the brain begins to, with other areas of life like in work, school, at home, and that rational thinking's lowered to a certain amount where it's really hard to think rationally. So they're two of the major signs that I often see and people begin to notice when negative stress is taking over. So what can you do? There's a couple of great things to do. The first one is exercise, which is most of you probably know, but is a well-known one, but an underutilized one. So trying to get out, even doing something if you've got chronic pain or you can't go to the gym, just go out for a walk. Don't push yourself too much. If you can only walk for 2 minutes and then go back home, start by doing that on a daily basis and seeing over a period of a couple of weeks if you can up that from 2 minutes a week to 3, then maybe 4, then maybe 5. And exercise is a great way because that starts releasing the serotonin and dopamine and starts actually naturally balancing out the cortisol to the good hormones and creating a level, healthy balance again, and gets more blood working to that rational thinking side of the brain again. Another good one is making sure you're trying to eat a healthy diet and sleep. These are two major ones that attribute to stress, anxiety, and depression, and something I often refer clients to if their diet needs looking at for nutrition, and also then looking at addressing hypnotherapy and counselling, improving your quality of sleep and making sure you're getting sleep. Because once your sleep hygiene improves, your overall levels of stress and anxiety begin to generally reduce. And another one which I'm going to go through in the video now is a simple self-help technique that I get people to start practicing usually 4 to 5 times a day, even when they're not stressed, and that's practicing something like mindfulness. And mindfulness can look like a lot of different things, and you can do it through a lot of different ways. And just to keep it simple today, I'm just going to teach a simple mindful breathing technique with you here, and I'm going to close my eyes and guide you through this for a few moments. And this is something I encourage people to do and take away to practice about 5 times per day, from when you wake up in the morning before you go to bed, and intentionally practicing daily breathing and intentional relaxation and mindfulness. And I'll go through the reason why we do that after I've run you through the technique, which I'll go through now. So you just want to take a few minutes there, and you can do this with your eyes open or closed. I'm going to do it with my eyes closed because I find that relaxes me more. But just go ahead and get yourself comfortable. And then all I want you to do is just take a breath in, and once you breathe in, you don't have to do this in any particular way, just feel the sensation of your chest rise. And as you breathe out, the sensation of your chest fall. Now, as I said, you can breathe in through your nose and out through your nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth, it doesn't really matter. But just breathe in and feel the chest rise. And take a moment, and as you breathe out, feel it fall. And as you breathe in again and breathe out, begin to notice just how naturally the body relaxes as you do this. Breathing in, feeling the chest rise. And breathing out, feeling the chest fall. Almost as if you're breathing in relaxation and breathing out any tension in the body or mind. So breathing in. You may even say rise, and as you breathe out, you may even say to yourself mentally, fall. Rise and fall. And focus on the physical sensations of the chest rising and falling. And after you've done that for a few moments, just bring yourself back into the room. And just take a moment just to, as you bring yourself back into the room, just pay attention to yourself. And notice any slight or maybe major, I don't really know because this is so individual, differences both mentally or physically that you notice after doing that exercise. Now what I encourage you to do is play around with that exercise. Some people solely like to focus on the feeling of the chest rising and falling. Other people like to use the words in their head as they say rise and fall. And you can even do this when you're out. Once you've practiced this a couple of times and gotten good at it, you can do this when you're sat waiting in a queue, maybe at the doctor's or in a supermarket, and just simply feel your chest rise and fall with your eyes open. You don't have to close your eyes. So I get people to play around with these techniques, and the idea is behind a simple technique like this is it begins to, again, lower those levels of cortisol and adrenaline and take blood away from the areas of the brain that respond to negative stress and anxiety and begins to level them out again and releasing the good hormones such as dopamine, serotonin that begin to balance out the system again and allow. Usually a lot of people begin to notice after doing that for a couple of days, their thinking begins to get a bit clearer and physical sensations begin to get better in response to practicing that. So that's something I want you to take away and begin to practice if you're suffering from stress and anxiety, or take it away and teach it to someone else who could potentially use this. And if you'd like to know more, I'd recommend contact me. My details are at the beginning and the end of this video, and have a discussion. Thank you very much.